Well, hello. Welcome back to Blue Collar Philosophy. We're doing an interview tonight, but we're actually doing something special. Not only do we have two guests, we have two completely different shows, but not quite. Zach, you want to let them know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a podcast called Living the Path, and with Chris, I've been collaborating with Chris over the last couple of months with my website, Millennial Zen Project. So I think that that's sort of a connecting point between these two, but we cross-promote each other's work because I'm a huge fan of Chris and what he's doing. And so, yeah, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Chris, because I know you've got some questions for us.
I at least have one question, okay? This is going to be a little bit weird, but just roll with it, okay? So, actually, before we even start, okay, Zach, introduce this person next to you before we go any further.
Yes. So this is my wife, Clarissa. And Clarissa have been married for just over 6 months, 6 months and 1 day. Yeah, 6 months and 1 day. So this is kind of like a semi-anniversary interview. And we had planned this interview because we wanted to discuss being an interfaith couple and what that means to us, what it looks like in our lives. So yeah, I consider myself a Buddhist. Clarissa is a Christian. And both of us have a lot of mutual respect for each other's spiritual faith, spiritual traditions, and how that plays out in our lives. So Chris has agreed to create some questions, and so he's gonna go ahead and quiz us.
And boy, did I ever! And thank you for ruining much of what I was going to say.
Yeah. I pretty much summed it all up.
I like the way you say things, so I don't have a problem with it. Okay. So before we get started, there is an icebreaker question. Okay. And I'm going to limit it to one because I don't want to be it too goofy. We actually have some questions. Okay. So this is how it's going to go. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. You raise your hand wherever you feel like it's right time to raise your hand. Somebody's going to do it first. Somebody's going to do it second. And there's going to be a winner. And I have no idea if it's the first one or the second one. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So 1, 2, 3. Oh,
first.
It was the second one.
It was the second one. Okay. Right. I think this is
skewed. The question was,
I feel like this is skewed.
Who has the correct religion?
Oh, man.
It was your wife.
Of course.
Oh, my gosh. We have the same religion. That's so cool.
Exactly, okay. Right? I see how that works. There's an imbalance here. I think this was rigged.
I just got it right now. It was so organic. Okay. No, okay. So we'll move to the first question because I feel like these questions, there'll probably be sub-questions on each of them and do some unpacking, but I really want to give you guys the space to really express yourself because I think this is a unique situation and it's probably going to become more common as the world changes, so these will be helpful. All right, so the first question is, just both of you quickly identify your faith and what you think the core concepts are.
All right, so I'm a Christian, and what that means to me is following what the Bible says, its teachings, following Jesus Christ and everything that he taught. So love one another, love your neighbor. I don't know what else to say there. Basically just that, just like loving each other, loving the world, living as Jesus lived. Yeah.
I find things the less complicated, the better, actually. So.
Yeah, that does remind me a lot of conversations we've had on that topic. Absolutely. Yeah, and so with Buddhism, it's very, just like with Christianity, it's hard to put into, a short, concise statement that would sum it up because Buddhism, like Christianity, is a living tradition. And so I tend to treat it that way. I would say that Buddhism starts with the archetype, for example, of the Buddha. And so I always like to think of it as, if you've ever seen the Buddha sitting in the lotus position, that image, it's a great contemplative and sort of meditation tool. You look at it and you can kind of feel into what the nature of Buddhism is just from sort of visualizing that and thinking about what it represents, sort of a peaceful, calm sort of approach to things. And but as far as like specific teachings, I'll just explain briefly the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path in a very short summary. So the Four Noble Truths would be the first truth would be that life is unsatisfactory, and that's my translation of the word dukkha, which has many different sort of layers and aspects of meaning, very much debated. But the idea is that life is unsatisfactory by its very nature. That's part of the nature of this reality, and the reason or the cause for this unsatisfactoriness is craving. So it's sort of like an addict. We're craving certain things and avoiding other things. So we have very strong preferences. The third noble truth is that there is the cessation or the ending of suffering is possible, the ending of the unsatisfactoriness, so that it's possible to actually find satisfaction in life. And the fourth noble truth is that the way to achieve that satisfaction or the end of unsatisfaction is through following the Eightfold Path, which is a division of the Buddhist teaching. Those 8 points would be right view or right understanding. The second one, right intention. The third one, right action. The fourth one would be right speech. The fifth is right livelihood. The sixth is right effort. The seventh is right mindfulness. And the eighth is right concentration. And so those can be gone into in more depth, but that's just like a general framework that a Buddhist would use to sort of organize their life practice.
Okay, awesome, thanks. So, so being married to each other, obviously, like not a lot of people are interfaith couples, but how has being married improved your? I should just read this verbatim because I'm having a hard time ad-libbing it. So, being married, how has your knowledge grown and life improved?
I would say for me, because Zach is Buddhist and that focuses more on the inner self and inner work, that's kind of caused me to also look in on myself and do some inner work and everything, and also look at the world differently. Like, we are all different. We're not all out here following Jesus. And that's the fact that I knew beforehand. But it, caused me to just look at the world and to know that everyone is on their own separate path, whether that's with Jesus or with Buddhism or any other belief system. And to just appreciate all of that more.
Yeah.
That is our little fish tank. Yeah, we thought we had solved that. Yeah. yeah, those things. Yeah.
But yeah, I just look at the world as more just differently, just knowing that there are so many different belief systems out there, and that not everyone has to be on my same path. I don't have to like beat everyone over the head with my Bible. Like, it's okay to have different belief systems within the same circle.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if he's told you about me, but I believe that there's going to be an ultimate Jesus sneak attack. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not worried at all either. So, Zach.
Yeah. So I would definitely echo what she said as far as like the diversity of beliefs. Is that for me, I came from a Christian background. So for me, it's like even the idea of considering myself a non-Christian seems kind of foreign to me. And it's not something that I would classify myself as. I'm not a non-Christian. I'm just, if I had to use an identifying label for my spirituality, I'd use Buddhist. But as Clarissa knows, and as the people around me know, I've studied and even practiced, several different traditions in different ways. And I actually had an interview very recently with someone who practices 9 different religions. And we sort of kicked around what it looks like to practice multi-religions. But specifically as far as with this relationship and what it's taught me is that Clarissa always helps me to think outside of my comfort zone and act outside of my comfort zone, because there's a tendency that, with a tradition like Buddhism, it can often be used sometimes to focus more on the inner work than on the outer results. And that's something that many Buddhists have, reformed in their traditions at certain points. And I believe that the tradition followed correctly does lead to outward action. But Christianity is so focused on loving people actively that agape aspect, I think, pushes and is good for, say, a Buddhist to come into contact with and know that, like, while we're doing the inner work, it's also important to reach out and to be of service and to not just hide ourselves away while we do this inner work, but also remember that we can engage with the world during this time and don't have to be complete ascetics in our practice.
Well, why I don't consider myself Buddhist. I mean, I can look at it and with the phrase, essence precedes form, because you can even see that in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the essence of what's to come, and the New Testament is the form. So for me, Buddhism, they have overlap. Be still and know that I am God is a very Buddhist like statement, and it preceded the Old Testament and Christianity, which means nothing. It means nothing to me other than it's what they said about that was true. And I think it would behoove people just to not recognize that. Like there's, kind of like gold everywhere. It doesn't mean you're Buddhist. That gives you problems, Well, obviously for you it isn't, and it hasn't been a problem. But which leads to the next question. So what are some of the conflicts that your different faiths have had, if any?
I would say I choose to focus on what our different faiths have in common rather than the conflicts. And so both Buddhism and Christianity do focus on love and what are some of the
compassion,
compassion,
forgiveness.
Yes, having compassion, forgiveness. So I mean, really, there hasn't been much conflict in our conversations as far as our faiths go. It's more about what they have in common, what ties them together.
Yeah, and to echo that, it's sort of like within any tradition, you could have people who are focused on, drawing distinct lines between different categories. And that's not, obviously, Chris, through my work, that's not my main emphasis. My main emphasis is, like Clarissa said, what do these traditions have in common? And yet differences can also be celebrated. So for me, I don't view the differences in the traditions as conflicts as much as they are different aspects of the spiritual life. And I think of it too in terms of in the Bible you have Paul representing faith as primary and then works sort of secondary, sort of the work secondary, and then James sort of emphasized, and without saying that it was necessarily a conflict, he emphasized a different order. He was more like, but faith is not enough without work. So they were emphasizing this paradox of having and experiencing grace and forgiveness, and knowing that in Buddhism we would say knowing that your innate nature is good, and also that there's always work to be done. So Buddhism is a little bit more compared to the view of James in the way that we approach things, but it's in no way contradictory with Christianity. It's just an aspect.
And the Four Noble Truths are something that I view as connecting kind of the two dots. So you have the first noble truth, which is
about suffering and the unsatisfactory nature of life.
Right, and in Scripture it tells us, I'm paraphrasing, in this life you will have troubles, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And then the second noble truth
is that the cause of suffering is craving, basically selfish desire.
Right, and that leads in Scripture. It's told as do not covet what your neighbor has. Don't be envious. Again, paraphrasing. Yeah. And the third.
The third one is that the end of suffering, or the end of this unsatisfactory feeling about life, can be attained. That you can have freedom. Freedom's possible.
Right, which is, Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. That's the tie-in there. And then the fourth one being
the Eightfold Path, yes. which is a systematic. It's much like in Christianity, how they have specific doctrines and formulations of doctrines, and Buddhism has the same thing for the sake of teaching and practice.
Yeah, and the Eightfold Path in Christianity is just following Jesus, following his teachings, listening to him. And loving others.
Yeah. When you guys were talking, I had a couple of thoughts. So in the New Testament, when they're talking about faith, I heard it described as not so much like a lot of people think of faith as I mentally assent that this is true, but it's actually not. Like it more has to do with fidelity and also like a sense of this, even though I don't see it in this situation, it's proven in the past that I can trust God, you know? That's kind of like what faith is. It's not like a blind, I don't know why, but I believe this. Like there's very good evidence when you actually do some self-reflection in your life. Another thing I thought of, the world is unsatisfactory and that we can transcend it. And it makes me think of the Cain and Abel story. When God says, Cain, why is your face downtrodden? And there's like, obviously he was upset that his sacrifice was rejected. And there's a lot of speculation on what it might be. Oh, it's not blood, so he didn't accept it. But the answer is actually right in plain sight. And God says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? It had nothing to do with the sacrifice. It was like his intention or his motive. Like his sacrifice wasn't like, oh, Dad, I brought you like a cup of coffee or something like that. It was like there was something not right, and he was giving out of manipulation. Mm-hmm. That's how I kind of take the story. And he says to Cain, he says, beware, sin crouches at the door, and it seeks to overtake you. But then the weird thing he says, but you must learn to master it. Now, like you don't hear sermons in churches about mastering your sin. But that's basically like what God says. So it's not something separate. It's like some kind of shadow side, like to you. So I didn't expect to go off that deep end.
But to add to what you're saying, though, about that idea of mastering sin, I do believe, and in my experience, the way that Buddhism has played out in my life is exactly that, like giving me tools for, it's sort of like if somebody really wants to take a very active and sort of procedure-based or systematized approach to eliminating sin in your life, like really there's nothing better than the Eightfold Path in my experience for sort of the purification of that. But the Eightfold Path is not just limited to Buddhism, it's found in all different faiths, just under different names. So, Christianity does practice, I would say most aspects, if not all, by some practitioners of the Eightfold Path.
Yeah, and I think what we would term sin is, sin means like basically that things aren't as they should be. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean, it's like a distorted manifestation of like a good desire. So you may have a desire for connection, but like you're kind of treating yourself flippantly and kind of like loose with yourself. And if that's what you want to do, I mean, that's one different story. But like some people might see that and you may seem out of control, but the underlying desire is for connection. And that's what's really driving. And I think the trick is like mastering your dark side is just bringing that into balance, recognizing like the pure desire and feeding energy into that feeling within instead of some exterior stimuli.
Yeah.
So the fourth question, could either of you picture or foresee a metamorphosis of your current faith as it stands at this present moment?
I think for me, just as I said earlier, just looking at the world differently. And I think like as time goes on, I am going to see the world even more differently than I do now. Just looking at more of my inner self, doing more of the inner work, and then just seeing people for who they are rather than who God thinks they should be. Just knowing that we are a mismatched society of different beliefs and non-beliefs and everything, and just becoming more okay with that, and knowing that the world still turns whether or not a person still believes in Jesus. Yeah.
And then for me with my beliefs, I definitely see, so there's a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh he was very involved in the civil rights movement, actually. Well, primarily with because he's from Vietnam. He was involved in the resistance to the Vietnam War within Vietnam, but he was completely pacifistic. He was a Buddhist, and so he basically promoted peace and was an activist in his community while people around him were getting killed and tortured and whatnot. And Martin Luther King Jr. nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. And him and Martin Luther King Jr. had developed this friendship, as well as Thich Nhat Hanh developed a friendship with Thomas Merton, the Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
The great Catholic teacher and mystic. And Merton also, too, by the way, he was a Catholic, but near the end of his life, he had gone to Buddhist temples and had, I believe, been initiated into Buddhism as well. He saw the two faiths as being very closely related. But Thich Nhat Hanh in particular had developed this friendship with Martin Luther King, and he's written about it in books like Living Buddha, Living Christ, and others, where he's talked about how he saw Christ in Martin Luther King, and that he learned so much and incorporated a lot of Christian ideals into his form of Buddhism, which is called engaged Buddhism, is something that he had developed sort of teachings based on that idea of active spirituality as a way to sort of help keep Buddhism from being too solitary and too monastic in its nature, because that's sort of its rooting.
Yeah, I kind of see it as like maybe Buddhism is the more philosophical, energetic expression of like seeking God, and Christianity later came along and it's more actions oriented.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you do need both, but I think that's just what you get in the physical world. You have energy and matter and all this potential, and that's really what we're playing around with on day to day. So the last question is, what advice would you give people who are considering, or if they're already in an interfaith relationship, and maybe possibly they're having problems that you guys don't?
My one piece of advice, or I guess several pieces of advice, would be to be open-minded and to be considerate of the other person. You know, there are a lot, like just coming from the Christian perspective, there are a lot of Christians in this world who are maybe closed off to any other belief system. And as humans, that's not where we need to be. We need to be more open-minded and to be more accepting and loving, because, you know, Jesus met all kinds of people, and he never once shunned someone for who they were. And so we as Christians don't need to be that way either. You know, be open-minded, be accepting. You don't have to believe what your partner believes in order to have a good relationship. You just have to have the compassion and the respect and the drive to be able to make it work. You know, Zach and I, we work because, you know, we both love each other, and there is just something that just connected us and that bonded us. And if you have that bond and that connection with someone, that's worth looking into, even if they don't believe the same thing that you do. And my other piece of advice would be to just, you know, listen to your heart. Like, you have to come from the inside and not be influenced by outsiders. Like, if you're being influenced by outsiders and they're telling you you shouldn't be with a person because of their belief system or because of how they dress or how they act or whatever, like, are those really friends that you need in your life? It has to come from the inside, and that's what ultimately brought Zach and I together. Is after a year and a half of him chasing me, I finally was like, okay, there's something here, and I can't deny it any longer. So just to trust yourself, trust your intuition, and if that leads you to be with someone who has a different belief system, then so be it. You know, the heart wants what the heart wants.
I think Zach actually is a Christian, because I think he employed the Jesus sneak attack on you. So
I will take any Christian who wants to consider me a Christian. I absolutely accept that as a little honorary.
Oh, well, I'm busy converting my atheist friend. Like, he's almost there.
He's awesome, by the way. I love that guy.
Yeah, no, he is awesome. He is awesome. I'm gonna reach out to him soon and see if he wants to do another one. Absolutely. Did you remember the question? Do I need to?
Oh yeah, yeah, no, I remember it. Yeah,
Okay.
as far as yeah, any advice for potential interfaith couples or actual interfaith couples. I mean, I echo completely what Clarissa said, and it really is more about getting the head out of the way so that the heart can make the judgments. Because I personally do really believe that in my time of practicing, one of the things that Buddhism aims to do is get you more in touch with your heart and your intuition, your inner values, as opposed to what's been sort of put on you by culture. And culture will tell you that you have to limit off who you interact with, very selective when it comes to beliefs and ideas and whatnot. And from a Buddhist perspective, like we're trying to get beyond that. We're trying to get beyond separating people based on surface level stuff. We want to actually know the person. We want to actually know the truth beneath what we call truth. So for me, it's like there's no real separation between, a Christian and a Buddhist. There's only separation if we let our minds create that separation. And so my recommendations would be, especially to any Buddhists, I would say, be careful that your intellectual nature doesn't get in the way of that simple approach to people, and to let people hold the views that they want to hold. Let people express their spirituality in ways that is different than yours, and also emphasize the similarities more than the differences. But if you do emphasize differences, like emphasize them in the sense that they're complementary, not, of course there will always be people, as we mentioned, who will not agree that these things can get along and that people can reach across the aisle. But throughout history, that's always been the case. But if we notice the way that the world and life is moving, it's moving towards more unity, not less. There are always people who are trying to push division. But for me and for Clarissa, like, we believe in unity and we believe in love and we believe in learning from each other. So,
Dude, that really got to me. And in that spirit, I have a bonus question.
yes.
Okay.
So what do you think the worst religious pairing would be?
Oh man. Whew. I
don't think I have an answer.
So when we first met, it's interesting because she was about 9 months or so into being a believer. She had converted about 9 months prior, and about 9 months prior or so, I had deconverted from Christianity and became basically an agnostic atheist of sorts for the time being. Humanism.
Ew, yeah.
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm joking.
We hate them. No, no, but that was when we had our very first interaction. And what struck me in the conversation was just how open-minded Clarissa was, how much she listened to me and where I was at, and as I sort of poured out like how I, what I was struggling with in the process. And it was the same church that we had gone in and out of, so like it was just such a mirroring thing.
Clarissa, you're a Cancer, right?
I'm a Pisces.
You're a Pisces? Okay.
Both of us
You're
have
almost as awesome as a Cancer, but not quite. A little wishy-washy, you guys are. But still awesome. Sorry, Zach. Continue.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I get the over.
Both of our rising signs are Cancer, by the way, and rising signs, we've talked about astrology. It's a fun thing to consider, and it's got many elements to it. But we always take it with a grain of salt.
Oh, well, and the Enneagram too.
Oh yeah, we love personality types.
Yes, I'm a 4-wing 5. He's a 5-wing 4. So we're just
awesome.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
she's sun sign Pisces. I'm moon sign Pisces. So we've got a lot of, and then both having our
moon sign Pisces. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, we got a lot happening, and also on Myers-Briggs, I'm INTP. She's INFP. So thinking.
I'm an INFP too.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
For that.
We're like the Kermit the Frogs of the personalities.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely.
I know. I can play Rainbow Connection, not on a banjo, but a guitar.
Oh,
anyway,
we got to hear that sometime.
Yeah.
So as far as like what a difficult pairing would be, I think a difficult pairing wouldn't involve necessarily the specific beliefs as much as the way a person would interpret.
I disagree. I think it would be a Christian Scientist and a Pentecostal.
Ooh, okay. I could see that being an issue. I could see that.
Yeah.
Actually,
someone's trying to force something, and then one is like, physical reality is an illusion. It's like, okay.
one of my great grandmothers actually was into Christian Science. And I don't know a lot about it, but obviously people can get very nuanced with the way that they see life, in existence. And I think that it's more a matter of like, are you dogmatic in your approach? And pretty much across the board, you could tie in any ideology, and if you're dogmatic about it, believe that it's the only way to see things, then it's gonna
Guys, I can't make this up, but I just realized that my phone is resting on a monitor, and they have something called the Christian Science monitor.
Yeah.
What? So weird. Okay.
I think a pairing that would be not a good one would be any pairing where each individual was not accepting of the other, or they were always, dogmatic about it, or, they just didn't listen, that would be a bad pairing, no matter what the beliefs are.
Yeah.
Just if you're not listening to
Ooh.
the other person, you're not having compassion, you're not, kind of leaning into what they're saying, that's a bad pairing.
Well, do you guys know what Baha'i is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like ultimate multi-religiosity. I think
friend
two of them would want to kill each other. I actually said to a friend, like, I think two cancers. I love cancers. I am one. I would probably kill the cancer couple. It'd be too much. It'd be too extra.
Way too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll make sure to make that the title of the video is Chris would kill a cancer couple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because in this
Bonus
you
murder.
never misunderstand things we say. So,
Right.
we'll lead with that one.
Well, INFPs are misunderstood a lot. Am I right?
I missed what you said.
I said INFPs are misunderstood a lot. That was your wife.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that.
We really think backwards, and sometimes we have a hard time. We have to be like, and like, because we had to figure out, okay, how do I train? It makes sense to me, but I know it's not going to make sense if I try to verbalize this right now. It's a real thing.
Right, and I know this video is going to go out there, and there are going to be people that are going to be like, what is she saying? I know what I'm saying. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to both of you, but somebody else.
They say Shakespeare was an INFP. Bill Watterson, who did Calvin and Hobbes, he was an INFP. Yeah, they flourish in the arts. So sometimes they have a hard time making their way in normal industry. So I don't regret it. I like being it. Anyway, hey guys, thank you so much. What was your name of your podcast again? I feel like Living the Path. I feel like a really bad friend right now.
No. Actually, it makes me. So this is an INTP or Enneagram 5 thing. We don't like when somebody else like comes across more loyal than we are, because we tend to be kind of lame friends. Oftentimes, we're so distant. So if somebody says, if somebody like doesn't remember the name of my stuff, I'm like, oh great, they're not paying close attention. So now I don't have to feel bad when I'm not always like being the most.
You just did the wrong thing, sir. I'm going to learn everything about you.
Oh man, you're gonna watch every episode. You're gonna be like commenting on all of them. You're gonna be like cross-posting on Reddit and stuff.
I'm gonna message you. I feel like you can't sleep. Do you want to hear your favorite nursery rhyme from when you were 3 years old?
Absolutely.
100%. I found out. Your aunt told me. I have the book too.
Yeah, you have the book that I haven't written yet, but you've read.
I mean, don't test my politeness or thoughtfulness, sir. Anyway, no. Hey, this was a blast. Thank you so much. And I do have something to tell you guys after we stop recording.
Okay.
I didn't want to do the recording.
Perfect.
Hey guys.
Sounds good. All right.
So for anybody from Walking the Path and Blue Collar Philosophy, you have a nice Memorial Day.
All right, you do.